Thank you, everyone, for coming this afternoon. We're here for Thelma Flom, who passed away Saturday morning, the 3rd of November 2018. On the Hebrew calendar, the date is the 25th day of the month of Cheshvan in the year 5779. She was close to a birthday, and I would say how old she was, but Thelma would not have wanted that. And in fact, for those of you who knew her, and I think most of you in this room did, you knew that really Thelma Flom was ageless, always young at heart and in spirit. The sages of our tradition teach that to care for someone who has died, to accompany her to her final resting place, is the greatest respect we can show a fellow human. The sages call it Gemilut Chesed Shel Emet, an act of true loving kindness. So again, we thank you on behalf of her family and friends for being here as we show that respect now to Thelma. We honor her, we tell stories about her, remember her, and say our final goodbye. The time of mourning is a complicated time, filled with many emotions and memories, some bitter and some sweet. We begin our service this afternoon with psalms, with readings from Scripture that will link Thelma's life with thousands of years of tradition of the Jewish people and the eternity of God. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai roi lo echsar, Binot teshe yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yenahaleni nafshi yeshovei. Yancheni v'maglei tzedek leman shemo. Gam ki elech begeit salma velo irara, ki ata imadi. Shivtecha umishantecha hema yenachamuni. Taroch lefanai shulchan neged sorerai. Dishanta v'Hashem en roshi kohosi revaya. Ach tov ach chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai, v'shavti beveit Adonai leorech yamim. A Psalm of David. Adonai, God is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters to revive my spirit. He guides me on the right path, for that is his nature. Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a banquet for me in the presence of my foes. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and loving kindness shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God, the house of Adonai, forever. From the book of Job. There are mines for silver and places where gold is refined. Iron is taken from the earth, and copper is smelted from the rock. But where can wisdom be found? And where is the source of understanding? There is no replacing a person of wisdom. Exceptionally bright, sure of herself, always prepared, in fact, often over-prepared, particular, demanding. She held herself and others to the highest standard. A woman who knew what she wanted and wasn't afraid to tell you what that was, or to let you know what she thought of you. A woman who stood on principles, who had rules, honest, brutally honest, but funny. A dry, sharp wit, a great sense of humor. These are just a few ways to begin to describe Thelma Flom, the woman we honor here today. Over the last 2 days, I've gone around the office here at Congregation Shared Zedek collecting memories and stories, because everyone who works here has one, at least one. Some say a nice lady, a chatty lady, a woman who participated in synagogue life, who once accepted an aliyah to the Torah on high holidays in her old age. What a rush that must have been. I remember personally when I first met her. I was at the back of the office, and if you've been downstairs, it's a long office. She was at the front, and I heard her all the way at the back. Wasn't sure what was going on, so I had to go to the front. She was a teacher for nearly 40 years, as you will soon hear, and her voice really had this amazing way of carrying. Unless she was giving you an important piece of advice, then she would lower her voice. But for the most part, you knew when Thelma was here. She made her presence known and felt. I went up to the front to see what was going on. There was this woman. Gray hair, big smile, not very tall. Glasses. They were kind of like these sunglasses, sort of. They were tinted. Maybe they were kind of progressive lenses. But there was this big smile. She recognized me. I don't remember her introducing herself. Immediately, she's giving me a piece of her mind. She's talking to me about the quality or lack thereof of sermons from the rabbis in synagogue. Who is this woman? That's what I wondered. She was direct, and I never forgot her, even if I didn't know her name. But we all do. It's Thelma Flom. In Hebrew, her name was Tama. Tama bat Yosef Leib ve'Esther Malka. She was the daughter of Joseph Shaw and Molly Esther Abrams, their oldest daughter. Born in Edmonton, Alberta, raised in the small town of Bellis, Alberta, as you will hear. Eventually, she moved to Winnipeg in her 20s, where she lived her life, where she met her husband, Jack Flom. 10 years her senior, a World War II veteran who was her opposite, but her perfect match, who taught her bridge, who allowed her to be herself. Strong, independent, opinionated, a woman who never needed anyone to take care of her. Well-read, a decision maker. They married in 1956. They had 2 sons, Martin and Corey, just a year apart, and moved into a house on Campbell Street in 1960. Thelma was a teacher, an elementary school teacher who graced classrooms all over the South End, La Vérendrye School, Rockwood School, Carpathia. She spent a lot of time in the Major Work Program, now defunct, long defunct, but it was a special program in the 50s and 60s designed for gifted children. How fitting, since that's exactly what she was, a gifted, precocious, overachieving, academically excellent child. She was a natural teacher, even when she wasn't in the classroom. At home, with her sons, with kids in the neighborhood, with kids she just met for the first time, with people she met at synagogue, with friends. She even once went to Israel as a tourist and ended up spending a couple of months teaching English in Israeli schools while she was there. She could not escape her calling, a true teacher. She was a voracious reader, the kind of woman who could put away 2 or 3 books in a single night, who owned so many books that the basement on Campbell Street had all of these books on all of these shelves, and when eventually she moved out of the house and they took out all the books in the shelves, the foundation shifted and the house sank because the books had been holding up the house. She was a Scrabble enthusiast. She loved board games, especially Scrabble, and she always played to win. Quietly competitive. She was a power shopper. She loved clothes. In fact, Thelma had a rule. During her teaching days, never wear the same outfit twice in the same school year. Her closets to this day reflect that belief. She was a fan of mahjong and later in life curling. Not just a fan of curling. In her 50s, she even tried her hand at it, curling at the Sunrise Curling Club. She was a lover of the arts, especially the theater and the symphony, a season ticket holder for over 50 years, something she truly enjoyed doing with her friends, her loyal, true friends. She was a woman who always wanted to learn, who kept going back to school. First, she got her Bachelor of Education, then, while raising 2 kids and caring for an ailing husband, got her arts degree. Then, went back for her Master's of Education. She always had the news on. She always loved to debate current events and issues. She was a woman who was a proud Jew, who kept kosher, probably more kosher than some rabbis, always asking family and friends from out of town to bring kosher meat with them when they would visit. And as we mentioned, she participated in so many programs and events here, classes we offered, Shabbat dinners, accepting that Aliyah one year on high holidays. She was a part of the fabric of Sheretz Tzedek and the Jewish community. She was a multitasker to the nth degree. She could watch the news, prepare a meal, bark directions to her sons, and do other things all at the same time, and somehow manage to do each job well. She was a lover of the cottage at Winnipeg Beach. She and Jack bought it in 1973, just a year before he passed. She kept going. Year after year, you'd find Thelma out there from May through Thanksgiving. It was organized just like she was. There were rules for everything just like she had. There were signs all over the cottage. This goes here, this goes there. If you've been to the cottage, you know. This is just the beginning. These are the outlines of a truly remarkable woman that we will dearly miss. And it's my honor and privilege now to call up her son Martin to deliver the hesped, the eulogy, and fill in the color that makes Thelma Flom such a special person. Please.
Thanks everybody for coming. And I'd like to preface this eulogy by saying that on occasion, when my mother and I were at the same funeral, we would look at each other and wonder if the eulogy delivered was for the person sitting in the coffin. And when I teased my mother about what I should say about her, if ever her time should come, she stressed, if you're going to make me proud, then you need to be honest with yourself and about who I really am. So if that's the case, my mom was tough, but very fair. She always felt that she was fair with people and expected the same in return. If she felt that she was not being treated fairly, she let it be known what had to be done to remedy the situation. Whether they were her students, relatives, business people, confronting my mother was a risky move, especially when she went into her third-person lecture mode. As many of you know, my mother had a very unique and colorful command of the English language, and nobody ever had trouble understanding her intent. And I know from personal experience that capital punishment might be more pleasant than being on the receiving end of one of my mother's lectures. She was well educated, organized, always gave everything a lot of thought and analysis, and was therefore right on most decisions that she had to make. If she didn't have expertise in an area, she consulted with somebody who did. As Matt was saying earlier, she was raised in the small town of Bellis, Alberta, in a one-room schoolhouse. Her father had a general store and guaranteed income from the postal office during the Depression years. But as the war was nearing an end, he realized that his very bright daughter was going to need a better education and eventually university in Edmonton. So while my grandfather was looking for a new store in Edmonton, my mother and grandmother went to Winnipeg, and my mother attended classes on the 3rd floor of Strathcona School in Winnipeg. This is a story that my grandmother used to always say. One day my grandmother was called to the school because my mother refused to slide down the fire escape chute. When the school said she wouldn't be excused until she slid down the escape, my Baba said, unless you've got a good explanation as to why that's necessary, I suggest that everybody go home. Well, shortly thereafter, Strathcona revised their fire escape rules. And my mom began school in Edmonton the next year. By the time she was 19, she had completed her 4-year education degree in Edmonton and was one of the first Jewish teachers to teach in Edmonton's public Catholic school system. She majored in calculus, math, and history, but because she looked like she was 15 and wore braces, they stuck her in elementary school, where she eventually taught for another 37 years. After a couple of years teaching in Edmonton, she moved to Winnipeg, where there was a larger Jewish population, and married my dad, Jack, in 1956. They were a great match. As Matthew mentioned, my mom was a person who needed to be involved in all decisions, which was rare for a woman at that time, and my dad was the easiest person to get along with. Unfortunately, my dad developed a severe heart condition early in their marriage, and my mom had to take care of 2 small children and an ailing husband. But fortunately, nobody could multitask better than my mother. So she did all this and earned a 2nd degree, played bridge with my dad, played mahjong monthly with the ladies, and read a few books each night. And whatever my mother did, she always did very well. So there was no possible excuse for my brother or I not to do well at anything we attempted. She made a point of reminding us that on a fairly regular basis. My mother also always emphasized that if somebody tells you that they are a good lawyer or a good doctor or a good hockey player, that's a sure sign that they are not. If somebody is good at something, then other people will do the talking. When former students talk to my mom about the stories they tell their children about being in my mother's classroom, that's priceless. When people ask if I'm related to the Mrs. Flom they had 30 or 40 years ago, and tell me that she was their best teacher and some of their favorite moments, priceless. And when my mom would say, I want to introduce you to Dr. So-and-so, who is in my major work class, what a sense of pride. My mother never once said she was a good teacher. She didn't have to. But I sure do know that she was proud to be a teacher and never stopped feeling the urge to teach. I know she graded my performance as a son every day. Always said there was room for improvement. Especially if she was getting older and I was thinking of putting her into a retirement home. My mom often said that you can't pick your relatives, but you can pick your friends. And that in her lifetime, she's been lucky enough to have many great friends, the kind that you can count on through thick and thin. And that had an effect on my selection of today's pallbearers. Each of these people has been really important to my mom's life. And so I would like to give special thanks to these people in particular. I'd like to mention Martin Rosner, sitting here in the first row. Martin's mother, Becky, and my mother became best friends on Campbell Street, walking the 2 Martys in their baby strollers. They were the 2 full-time career ladies with the 2 babies who depended on each other for support when the other couldn't get away from work. I've got the Hymans, Sandy, Murray, and their great mentions, Stephen, Brian, Jonathan, and Jeff. besides always checking to see how my mom is doing at the beach and in the city, and making sure that she's included for every New Year and Passover dinner, despite having I don't know how many grandchildren now. They always made sure there was a seat available for my mom. And Murray is available to make sure that each financial question is investigated no matter how he is feeling. So thanks. On that note, in the last few years, as my mother's hearing really deteriorated, doctors or people meeting her for the first time would ask if she had dementia. And I would ask why. And they would say because she keeps repeating herself. And I would have to say, that's not a sign of dementia. That's a sign of being an elementary school teacher. I have to explain to them that since I've been 8 years old, every time I sit down at the kitchen table and take my first bite, my mother tells Corey or I not to forget to put the dishes in the dishwasher and everything else back in the fridge. My mother often worked late, or had night courses, or had to go to the hospital for one of my dad's frequent stays. So she felt it was necessary to teach us how to be independent from as early as 5 or 6 years old. For my 5th birthday, I got a Timex watch, so I would know when it was time to come home. When my mom was late coming home, she would either call the Rosners or the Brodskys, and when I was older, the Ringers on Lanark Bay. For my 6th birthday, I got a chained wallet, so I would have a taxi or bus fare if I ever got lost. As my mother and I watched TV the last couple of years, my mom would often joke that her methods of teaching independence would lead a parent to being in trouble with the Child and Family Services these days. I'd like to thank the Durbitsky clan. Thelma's brother-in-law, Charlie, had a heart of gold and made sure that family was priority number 1. Son Royal and grandson Brant are here today, and they're doing the heavy lifting, so thank you. Shell Glesby and David Garfield, pallbearers. They've been friends of mine and family since early childhood. And my mom really appreciated their stopping by to help with the problem of the moment whenever I called in a panic from BC. Of all my friends, nobody knows my mother better than David Ringer, who could not make it in from Kelowna, but is watching online. Had my mother known that David could not make it today, I'm sure she would have selected a different day to die on. My mother has never forgotten how we offered to drive me down to the Mayo Clinic one summer and stay with my brother in a motel for 2 weeks while I recuperated from leg surgery. David and his late parents, Bunny and Shirley, were always favorites of my mother and who always acted as a second set of parents. My mom, as an honorary pallbearer today, my mom insisted that Greg Brodsky must be one of the pallbearers. When I phoned Greg on Sunday, he said that he could be an honorary pallbearer on condition that I called Danny in Toronto. Greg still drives a tough bargain. I'm going to tell this story despite the fact that I know that Danny is watching on live stream. The week before I was about to start grade 1, my brother brought this new kid into the house. He opened a bathroom drawer, took out some shoe polish, and put it on the hallway carpet that had been installed 1 week earlier. My mother asked Danny where he lived. And with Danny in hand, she was introduced to Greg and Sylvia Brodsky. My mother gave Danny a stern lecture, and somehow a lifelong friendship formed between the Brodskys and the Floms. When Danny needed a subtle lecture, he got it from Thelma, as well as a homework assignment, which he would often go over with my dad. When Martin needed a scolding, he had to go face to face with Manitoba's top defense lawyer. When the Brodskys moved to Tuxedo and Greg was in the newspaper defending serial killers, my mother would say, "I'm going to knock on Greg's door to talk about this traffic ticket." And I would say, "I don't think this is a good time." And she would come back a week later and say, "Greg handled it, no problem." Or if we had a problem with a housing issue, and I would say, "How is Greg going to help you?" my mom would come back an hour later and say that Greg got a guy to solve the issue. So if you want a job done, give it to a busy person. He's always got time. Greg always stopped what he was doing to help my mother, including inviting us to Passover Seders at his parents' house whenever my dad was not feeling well. The Brodskys never forgot their friends from Campbell Street. My mother's teaching friends, like Frances Mary Brown, who she's gone on many trips with, like China, always included her in the family Christmas dinners. Thank you. And Dorothy Arnold, who always made sure that my mom had rides to symphonies, warehouse and MTC productions, and of course the monthly teacher dinners. Her 2 book clubs, who always encouraged her coming, even when her reading and driving and hosting abilities became much more limited. In concluding, I was 16 when my dad died. And people would say how sorry they were. I responded at that time that it wasn't their fault, and I was lucky to have such a great father who always had a smile on his face for 16 years. When I see now what sad parenting some of my students get, I appreciate my time with my father even more. When I reflect on times with my mother this week, perhaps the greatest gift she gave me was how to read people, so that I could make the same good choices in selecting friends that she has. I think the greatest honor over the last few years was realizing that she approved my choices. And those of you here today or watching on live stream are the people that my mother and I cherish to honor my mother's memory. My mother died with a great sense of pride. Thank you all.
Thank you, Martin, for those powerful and meaningful words. I'm always amazed how much our Hebrew names say about our character, without us really knowing, because they're given to us before we become our character. Thelma's Hebrew name is Tama, which can be translated as pure, perfection, something she strived for and expected in others, but also honest, straight, true, and honest. She was a woman of principle, a woman with rules. In this day and age, she's an inspiration because she came from a day and age when there weren't very many women like her. Someone that all people can look up to and emulate. Strong, confident, motivated. One of Thelma's rules, as Martin mentioned, don't ever say you're good at something. If you're good, you let your actions do the talking. And so, Thelma, we are here today to tell you that as a teacher, you were good. Please rise for the memorial prayer, the El Malei Rachamim. Rachamim shochein b'amromim Hametzei menucha nechona Tachat kanfei Shekhinah B'malot kedoshim uteorim Kezohar arakia mazhirim Henishmat Tama Bad Yosef Leib Vester Malka Shehalcha Leolama Began Eden de Menuchata Anabal Harachamim Hastirea Beseter Knafecha Leolamim Utzeror Bitzeror Achaim Enishmata Adonai Hu Nachalata V'tanuach b'shalom al mishkava v'nomar Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the soul of Thelma Flom, daughter of Joseph and Molly Esther, who has gone to her eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May her soul be bound up in the bond of life. May she rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. Please be seated. We're about to conclude our service here at the synagogue. We'll then proceed for interment at Shared Zedek Cemetery, 230 Armstrong. We invite you to join us in caravan fashion as we drive. We put your four-way flashers on. We do stop at red lights. The route we usually take is up Sherbrooke to Logan, Logan to Salter, over the Salter Bridge to Armstrong. You can follow with us. Of course, you can meet us there. If you choose to wait here at the synagogue for us to return, because we will return after for a meal of consolation, as our attention turns from honoring and respecting Thelma to comforting her family, the mourners who are left behind to grieve. You can wait for us here if you choose. It's usually, let's say maybe 2:15, 2 or 2:15 when we're back. In a minute, I'll ask the pallbearers, brothers, to exit first. And then we'll invite all of you to form two lines on the steps, the stairs of the synagogue. This picks up on what we talked about at the beginning, Gemilut Chesed Shalamet, respect, accompanying our loved one to her final resting place, so that she may pass through us, with us on both sides. I want to thank you again for coming. To Thelma's sons, I say, Hamakom yinachem etchem b'toch sha'ar avelei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. May you and all family and friends who mourn be comforted, just as everyone in Zion and Jerusalem has been comforted by God. Thank you again for coming. I invite the pallbearers, Martin and Corey, to go first, and then we'll exit and head to the cemetery. Thank you, everyone.